Hi guys, so in this video we're going to go over A1.1 water, the SL part of it, so this would be relevant for everyone. To start, let's go into like how water is useful to us. Our first cells, all of life originated essentially in water. Like if we think back to the Earth's atmosphere, apart from the key gases, water vapor was a very significant and important component. So let's like it was initially in the gas at first as clouds or whatever from volcanic activity and whatever, and then it condensed into our oceans, through which the water cycle could then take place, and therefore life could form and yeah. And so water is necessary as it behaves as a solvent, it behaves as a metabolite. It's just useful for almost anything you can think of. It's required for all chemical reactions to take place. So some examples, like if we look at a cell, there's cytoplasm on the inside, right? And within the cytoplasm, all these chemical reactions take place. And that is because it has water. A huge component of it is water. It's fluid. It has water. So components within the cell can move around, collide, interact, have a chemical reaction, whatnot. It's essential for like blood and other bodily fluids to contain like whatever it needs to have. It allows for transportations in and out of cells. Like if we think of um like protein pumps, they need something else to push it through, and that's water. And at the most basic level, it provides us with places to live, like oceans, lakes, rivers. So water is essential for pretty much everything. Now, let's delve into the actual water molecule. So, in this, we're going to learn about the concept of polarity. And just to keep in mind, when a bond is polar, there is um, unequal sharing of electrons. Okay? So, if we think of an atom, it's made up um, of neutrons, it's made up of protons, and it has a cloud of atoms, right? And now electrons. These electrons are attracted to the protons through um electromagnetic forces of attraction, right? Now, if we look at a water molecule specifically, we know it's made up of H2O, right? But if you look at just the bond between H and O, oxygen has how many? It has four, sorry, it has eight. It has eight, I'm just write that number down. Eight protons. Hydrogen only has one proton. So because of that discrepancy, it allows for like an unequal like sharing of the charges. So the bigger cloud obviously would have like more electrons. If the electrons be pulled in this direction because of the greater pull that oxygen has over hydrogen. And so that makes water a polar molecule because it has polar bonds. So I'm gonna just draw a water molecule properly. So H2, and because of this polarity, um, and more electrons being pulled towards the oxygen, oxygen now is a permanently negative dipole. And that's how you signify it with a delta positive or delta negative. And hydrogens are permanently have a permanent positive dipole. And this presence of polarity and this type of bonding allows for hydrogen bonds to come into play. So the reason water can stick together or form these big liquids is because of these hydrogen bonds. So if we draw more water molecules, sorry. So we keep in mind to always draw the dipoles because that's a very important part. Um, Hydrogen bonds can form between the hydrogen and the water. The positive and negative dipoles, obviously opposites attract or whatnot. Um, and that's what allows water to sort of stay together. And these hydrogen bonds are intermolecular forces, not actual bonds like covalent bonds. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And they are weak. Hydrogen bonds are weak. They're weaker than covalent bonds. So they're individually easily broken. However, in large quantities, like in an ocean, um, multiple hydrogen bonds contribute to that stability in water. So now let's move on to the actual properties of water. Let's first look at something called cohesion. And that is when there's a mutual attraction between the water molecules and the hydrogen bonds. So basically, when molecules of the same type are attracted to each other. So in this case, it's water plus water. And this is because of those hydrogen bonds. Okay. Now examples of this for cohesion is relevant is like, let's look at surface tension, for example. So, you've probably noticed this, but like in any small water body, you can always see like those little bugs floating on top. They can somehow walk on that water or float around, and that's because they benefit from surface tension. And this is when the membrane, like the water surface, acts as a membrane where these small animals or things just can't break through. And that is because the molecules are attracted, the attraction between the molecules is stronger than any external force. They're more attracted to each other than any external force, regardless of density. And that's what allows organisms to live on that surface. Now, these organisms don't have enough energy to break through all those multiple hydrogen bonds simultaneously, therefore, they benefit from surface tension. Another example is in the xylem tissue of a cell, a plant cell. Like if we think about xylem tissue and this is the roots and then the leaves are here. Like this is a very bad drawing. But there's something called a transpiration stream. Allows for water to be absorbed and then exchanged out of the leaves whenever there's like excess water, for example. Now, transpiration occurs, it pulls water out of the root into the stem, out of the leaves, and without cohesion, this transpiration stream over here wouldn't be possible because the water would then without cohesion just like not move up. It would just be disconnected in the chain and not continue in that chain. But with cohesion, these tensions against the water are withstood again because of hydrogen bonds. Now we're going to move on to something called adhesion. So adhesion is another property. This is when water is attracted to other polar molecules. So it's water and polar molecules. And if they're polar, that means they're hydrophilic. This is another keyword. And a hydrophilic essentially just means they like water. They will stick to water. They are attracted to water, unlike hydrophobic, which we will get into later. So adhesion, again, is when hydrogen bonds form between water and the surface of another polar molecule. If you remember in the drawing or like in the explanation I did like a few moments ago, hydrogen bonds were caused because of that dipole that was formed and also the presence of hydrogen and water and oxygen. Um, and that's what allows for polar molecules to also be attracted to water. So again, another example of this is in the xylem. So xylem uses both adhesion and cohesion. Cohesion allows for the transpiration stream to be continuous, and adhesion allows for the water to stick onto the cells of the xylem tissue. So as it goes up, let's say at one point, okay, it doesn't need to transpire anymore, it's reached the right amount of water, whatever. It would just fall back down if there was no adhesion, because there's nothing making it stick to the walls of the cell. So because of the polarity of the cell, the water can adhere to the cell walls and or just the cell, preventing it from dropping back down. Another example of this is in the capillary action of soil. Like molecules adhere to the polar molecules in the soil, allowing water to then be taken up by the root hair cells or the cell walls. Let me just write this down: root hair and soil, and then cell walls. And for cell walls, or it's basically when the waters adhere to the cellulose of the glucose in the cell wall, because of the polarity. So if any of the wall starts to dry out, the water is automatically re-wetting that area because of that polarity and that pull. Now on to solvent properties. So another keyword, solvation, and that is just interaction between solvent and a dissolved solute. And again, this is when water forms hydrogen bonds with a solute, forming something called a hydration cell. So if we take sodium, for example, this is a positive little thing. The oxygen from the water will then be attracted to it because of that negative dipole charge. So they will be attracted. If it was a negative solute, then the hydrogen would be attracted. Same thing for like ions if they were dissolved in water. Um, that's pretty much it for solvation. But reasons why this could be important is like in blood, things need to be dissolve. Things need to dissolve into blood, transported. Even in cytoplasm, things have to be dissolved. Solutes have to move around and whatnot. Now, these are some other physical properties you're going to move on to. You have to know these in relation to other animals, more so their adaptations and such. But we're going to go into these animals later. Let's just get into the basics first. So first is buoyancy, and that is the upward force exerted on an object in a medium. Um, and basically the volume of the object will be the same as the volume of the water displaced. Now, air has almost no buoyant force, whereas water has a greater upwards force than downwards force because the water pressure is greater than the air above. Like if you think about trying to put like a basketball in the water, it doesn't stay down; it gets pushed back up, and that's because of buoyancy. So the downward force from from the air, is less than it would be from the water. Now, viscosity is just the medium's resistance for an object moving through it or movement in general. Air is less dense, so it is less viscous. Water is more dense, so it is more viscous. If you think about moving your hand right now in the air, it's easy to do that, right? But if you do that in the water, you need a lot more energy, and that's because it's more dense and more viscous. Then is thermal conductivity, and that is the ability for a medium to transfer heat. Air is an insulator, so it doesn't transfer heat as much, so it has a low thermal conductivity. Water can transfer heat much more effectively, and so it is more thermally conductive. Next is specific heat capacity, and that's the amount of heat or energy required to raise the temperature of a substance by 1 degree. Now, simply put, that is just the ability for a substance to change temperature. Air changes temperature very easily, relatively easily. Water can give off and absorb a lot of heat or a lot of energy without changing temperature per se. Now we're going to go into these examples, these two animal examples. First is the black-throated loon. Um, Before I start, these examples are crucial. If like you just need to know these, unfortunately, because they do come up in exam questions. Whenever they ask about properties of water in relation to examples, they're more likely than not looking for the black-throated loon or ring seal. But again, it does depend on the context of the question. So to start, black-throated loon is a bird, clearly, that lives in cold regions. And it lives both on land and water and air, depending what it's using these things for, like land for nesting, water for feeding, air for flying, whatnot. It relies on buoyancy, as you can see in this picture, to stay afloat when on the water's surface, and it overcomes viscosity by having webbed feet. And so, if we look at this figure, it's streamlined figure. This beak is streamlined, so if it dives, it's a very steep dive, no like resistance. And then it also has webbed feet. You can't quite see. I'm just gonna draw it there, and that's to overcome viscosity. Okay, then also, it has like I don't know, you can't really see this here, but it has a little oil gland near the tail, um, to make them more waterproof. and prevent a lot of body heat loss when in the water due to water's high thermal conductivity. It can transfer heat very easily. Let me just get these notes down for you. So yeah, there you go. It relies on buoyancy to stay afloat. It overcomes viscosity by having a streamlined figure and webbed feet. And there's an oil gland to prevent heat loss. The next example we're looking at is something called a ringed seal. Again, it lives in cold climates or cold regions. Okay, and it's not very buoyant like the loon, but it's still able to keep its snout above water for air when it goes diving or whatever. You can see here very more clearly is it has got like a streamlined figure again and a more padded like paddle like rather um paddle like tail or feet. And that's again to overcome viscosity. And it also has a very thick blubber to minimize that heat loss due to that, again, thermal conductivity and heat transfer. So let me write it down. Thick blubber to reduce heat loss. Paddle feet and streamline for viscosity. Now, it's not for viscosity, it's more like to overcome viscosity. But that's pretty much it for all the SL and HL content. We're going to go over the HL bit for water in another video. Hope this was helpful. Thank you.